So, good evening, everyone. First of all, since we're doing these teachings together with people at Santa Fe, I believe, in New Mexico. I've never been to New Mexico. So when Venerable Dundrup sent me a message a few months ago, asking me if I would be able to speak about the Dharma with you guys, I thought myself, I've never been to New Mexico. I want to go to New Mexico. So anyway, it's nice to do things with people, with like-minded people overseas. So even if I'm not there with you, at least in spirit, we are all connected. And so, well, I thought of, so when I spoke with Dundrup a few months ago, he asked me if I could do a series of talks about a text that is called 50 Verses of Guru Devotion. I was quite reluctant to do it. I'm still reluctant to do it. I've never studied this text in depth together with the teachers, so it doesn't feel right to speak about something that I have not received a transmission for. I've not studied it at great length. But then Dundrup asked if I could talk about the 5 powers. So this is something that is more of a familiar territory for me. So I'm happy. I was definitely happy to do it. I'm still very happy to do it. Now, often what I do when I start a teaching session or a discussion session, I take some time to correct my motivation with Refuge and Bodhichitta, and I hope that we can do it together. I assume that many of you here are Buddhists. Actually, I know a few of you here, so I know that you're Buddhists, and I assume that those who I haven't met before, you're Buddhists, or at least have some Buddhist inclination. So we will start our session with going for refuge and developing bodhicitta. Doing it in this way turns our whole discussion into a Buddhist practice in itself, which is oriented towards, first of all, attaining a good state of rebirth in our next lifetime, towards attaining the state of liberation, towards becoming a Buddha ourselves. So it's good to transform everything that we do into something that has a certain direction, a certain momentum. And so maybe if I could invite you just to take a few deep breaths to settle the mind down, to calm it down. And in correcting a motivation for this session, we can remind ourselves that we have obtained a precious human rebirth, 3 freedoms and richnesses, 8 states of freedoms and 10 richnesses that make it possible for us to enjoy external conditions and internal conditions that are most suitable for developing our mind. We have met with the Dharma, we've met with spiritual teachers, we've met with Kyabje Lama Sopa Rinpoche, the spiritual director of the FBMT. We have His Holiness the Dalai Lama to guide us, and many other teachers in and outside of the FBMT organization that lead us along the path to enlightenment. We also have the internal condition, freedoms and richnesses, and mostly faith and trust in the teachings of the Buddha and the potential of our own mind for spiritual development. But our time is short in that our freedoms and richnesses are easily lost. It's so difficult to find them again in the future. So death is definite. It will come in the future, and the time of death is uncertain. And at the time of death, nothing will be of help apart from positive habituations, positive things that we have done in this and previous lives. They could direct a mind to a better state of rebirth, a good state of rebirth in the next life. Again, meeting the Dharma, again, having the leisure to develop our mind. And should we end up in a miserable state of existence in a future lifetime, it would be terrible, let alone undergoing different states of pain and suffering. We're not going to have the capacity to develop our mind, to meet spiritual teachers, to meet the Dharma. What can afford protection from such states of rebirth are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. That the Buddha, the teacher that has attained the state of enlightenment and found the state of enlightenment, taught us how ourselves to become Buddhas. And the Dharma that the Buddha taught, leading to the development of the actual Dharma in a mind stream, through paths and through cessations. And the Sangha, the community of teachers, people that we look up to, Arya Bodhisattvas, and other beings that help mediate the teachings of the Buddha to us, leading to our own state of Buddhahood, to the development of true paths and true cessations in our own mind, to our own becoming of an Arya Bodhisattva. And so we think that we're going to talk about the 5 powers, think about the 5 powers, meditate on the 5 powers, for the sake of all living beings that extend to the reaches of space. We can think that they're with us for the duration of this session, for the duration of our practice. And just like us, they have no freedom in samsara, going through states of birth, sickness, aging, and death, under the control of karma and afflictive states of mind. And we owe an immense karmic debt to all of them. Since time without beginning and up until now, there have been our mothers and fathers, brothers, sisters, friends, girlfriends, lovers, children, cousins, colleagues. They've helped us in so many different ways. We have the ability to repay their kindness. And the best way to repay the kindness is for ourselves to become Buddha, with the knowledge of the dispositions of others, to be able to teach them what they need in order to develop their own mind. And so in thinking that the Buddha is in the space in front of us, surrounded by Arya Bodhisattvas, embodying all the Buddhas, all the Dharma, all the Sangha, and also all of our gurus, we take heartfelt refuge in the 3 triple gem, 3 noble jewels. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. But the accumulations I gather through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. But the accumulations I gather through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. But the accumulations I gather through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. All right, let's hit the road. And so I'm wondering if, Paula, if you can make me a co-host. I have a couple of things that I thought of sharing on the screen as we go along. Thank you very much. All right, so thank you very much for everyone who has joined in. I thought of starting with an introduction of myself. I'm very good at speaking about myself, so let's start with that. And so my name is Kartson. As I said a few minutes ago, it is made of 2 names, Karma and Sundru. So you take the first syllable for each name and you come up with Kartson. I was born in Israel. I grew up in Israel, and hence my weird accent. If you have any problems with understanding what I say, you can either raise your hand or type something in the chat box, and I will try to speak clearly. So I grew up in Israel. When I was in my mid-20s, I was backpacking through Central America, through South America, was totally captivated by the local traditions and cultures and sceneries. And I was an avid Spanish student. But then my time was up. I had to go back home. And a year or a year and a half later, I wanted to go to Colombia for a month. I had some time off. I was working as a software engineer. I had 4 weeks break from work, and I went to my travel agent. It was at a time in which people, the option of buying a flight ticket online was not available. So I went to my travel agent and said, I want to go to Colombia for a month. The flight ticket was $1,600 at the time. That was 25 years ago. And I thought to myself, that's a little bit expensive. So the travel agent said, well, India is half price. So I thought to myself, what the heck? I'll go to India. And so I went to India, and I knew nothing about Buddhism, nothing about Hinduism. I was just a backpacker. But then I met a couple of Tibetan monks, Tibetan Buddhist monks along the way, and they seemed to be very kind. I wasn't a spiritual seeker. I wasn't looking for answers for big questions. I was just into hanging out. But I met a couple of Buddhist monks, and I was completely captivated by just this general sense of kindness that they exuded, and just open-minded. And so I became a little bit intrigued, and I bought a couple of books. His Holiness the Dalai Lama's biography, Freedom in Exile, and I think that the other one was called The Way to Freedom, a general presentation of Buddhist principle put together by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So I was reading it as I was traveling through India, and quite a few of the things that I read made sense to me. And when I went back home, I met a couple of weeks later an old childhood friend of mine who I haven't seen for many years, but she happened to be arranging a visit of an American nun in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. I think that maybe many of you know her, Thupten Chodron. She was, at the time I was still living in Israel, so she was arranging the first visit of Thupten Chodron to Israel. And I had a time. I had all the means or the facilities that I needed in order to dedicate 10 days of basic lumbering presentation. I knew nothing about it. Everything. So I participated in that 10-day course. And although there were many things that were completely beyond me, I still felt that there is some really exciting core of teachings that is really, really useful for myself. So I started to take Buddhist classes, either in Israel. I traveled to India about once a year. And when I was 30, I left my job as a software engineer and went to India again. I thought I'll travel in India for 6 months, study a bit of Buddhism, do some retreats. But then I met a girl, and we hooked up. We stayed together for 3 or 4 years. Anyway, I ended up staying in India for 4 years, and halfway through, I also met someone that became one of my closest teachers. And I thought that the only way for me to understand better what our Tibetan teachers say is to learn Tibetan myself. So I had the time, had the money. I didn't want to go back to being a software engineer. So, and I was quite happy in India. So I just stayed and studied Tibetan. And at some point, I joined the FPMT translators program, the Lotsa Warinchen Sambo's translators program. And then 6 months before my graduation, I got an email from Chinrezig Institute in Australia that offered me a job here. What I knew at that point is that I don't want to go back to anyway. And so I arrived in Australia, and I found out that what FPMT centers have to offer in terms of Buddhist education was better, at least for me on a personal level, was better in terms of providing study programs going all the way from the beginning. And I was very much a beginner still in Buddhism. So going all the way from the beginning, from A to Z, in a pace and language that was very suited for my, at least, disposition. So I came here with a commitment for 2 years, and 17 years later, I'm still here. So I've been working all along as the translator, interpreter for the study programs here at Chinrezig Institute. So I've had the fortune to work with a few geshes. And that's about it, I think. That's how I go to be here, live here in Australia. And along the way, I also became a Buddhist monk, as you can see. So that's me. Now, what I thought of doing in relation to looking at the 5 powers is, first of all, to give a general introduction to the 5 powers, and then to start going into greater details with respect to each one of them. So the 5 powers are sets of 5 tools that help us to systemize, formalize, create a good framework for our daily practice. It creates, I think, a flow in our daily practice that is helpful in maintaining a certain continuity and a good basis for development and assessment with respect to how well we are doing, or maybe not doing, in terms of our personal practice. And so we find references to the 5 powers in different texts. One of them is, for example, the Guru Puja. For those of you who are familiar with the Guru Puja, there is the Lamrim meditation within the Guru Puja, reviewing the steps of the path of enlightenment. And I think that one of the verses says, cherish the practice of the 5 powers, the quintessence of the Mahayana instructions, something like that. Pretty bad at reciting verses by heart. So anyway, that's one reference to the 5 powers. Another reference to the 5 powers is found in Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun, a text that was composed by a Tibetan master that is called Namkapel, that, as far as I remember, was one of the students of Lama Tsongkhapa. And so Khenchen Namkapel based his explanation of the 5 powers on the root text for Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun, which is the 7-point mind training. So actually, the 7-point mind training, this is what I should have said. The 7-point mind training mentions the practice of the 5 powers. And the 5 powers are taken to be a practice. It is called a practice for it is an integrated practice for a single lifetime. Now, when I think of myself, or when I think of, I guess, most of you here in this session for today, I think that for many of us, at least half of our lifetime is already gone. So rather than saying that it's an integrated practice for one lifetime, probably for us it's like for the time that we have left in this life. So this is how I prefer to think about it. It is an integrated practice that can help me to create some flow and structure into my daily practice for the remaining of my life. And those are things that we do. I think many of us do it in a personal meditation session anyway, daily. But it's good to become cognizant of it, to recognize it, in order to deliberately use it in order to make it better. And so the 7-point mind training text says, cherish this practice. I think that I have it here on the screen. Where is it? So the integrated practice of a single lifetime, training the 5 powers. This is taken from this from the 7-point mind training, and this commentary that I was reading is part of Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun. Anyway, so then, in actual fact, we have 2 sets of 5 powers. There's one that we practice for the duration of our life, or however long we have to live. And then we can use another set of 5 powers having the same names, being on the verge of death, which means that if we have trained well in the 5 powers, creating a system for our spiritual practice throughout our life, and we became familiar with how to generate our motivation, how to purify negative actions and obscurations, how to make aspirations, how to dedicate whatever virtue we have accrued in a spiritual practice, we can then make it really focused, really potent when we approach the time of death. And so I think that in an ideal situation, we will be notified by a doctor, GP, or what have you, that we have a certain terminal condition. We will be told that we have so many months to live, or so many years to live, or maybe a few weeks or a few days. Of course, receiving news like that is not something to be happy about. It's not a cheerful event, I assume. But still, if we have practiced well throughout our life, and we have thought well of death and impermanence, having found a precious human rebirth, and considering death and impermanence, and having gone for refuge, and having habituated the mind with positive states, we might be able to avoid freaking out about dying soon, allowing our mind to become more focused, generating a really strong and fierce state of mind that will allow us to set a good intention leading to our death and leading to ensuring a good state of rebirth in the next lifetime. So there's another set of 5 powers that we will look at that will be able also to create a certain system of flow to our preparation for death. And so if we have habituated our mind with the system of 5 powers and integrating a practice into the 5 powers throughout our life, would have a much better chance to also influence our state of mind when we approach death. If we haven't done it well throughout our life, and we try to do it leading up to the point of death, we might be successful to a certain degree. Hopefully we will be successful. But I reckon that finding yourself on a deathbed, or at least receiving really grim predicament of our upcoming death, would be something that will be terrifying, distressing, will probably freak out, might be struck by a great sense of distress. So if we haven't really prepared our mind through some form of consistent Dharma practice throughout the life, it would be hard to then become really focused and positive leading up to the time of death. It's possible to do it, but wouldn't it be better to come prepared, knowing that we have done our preparation? And so these teachings on the 5 powers are teachings that are regarded as Mahayana teachings. After all, we find them in a tradition of teachings that is a mind training teaching, or in Tibetan Lojong. So although Lojong itself is called in general Mahayana mind training, still everything that we also train it from a Hinayana context is also included within Mahayana mind training. So it's not only training a mind with the mind of enlightenment and the associated branches of the mind of enlightenment, Bodhichitta, and the practices of bodhisattvas, generosity and ethics and patience and so forth. All the other important bits which create a very foundation for us in terms of, again, thinking of a precious human rebirth, and thinking of death and impermanence, and thinking of going for refuge, and thinking of the drawbacks of samsara. Everything is included within the Mahayana mind training. And anyway, when we think of the teachings of the Buddha, we said that the Buddha gave 84,000 discourses. And all of those different discourses are for training a mind. So it's not that only some set of instructions within the Mahayana is mind training instruction. In fact, all the teachings that the Buddha gave are for training our mind, are for purging our mind from anger, attachment, and ignorance, for purifying our mind, for making our mind the best that it can be. And so in general, everything that the Buddha taught is mind training. But within that, there are things that we can use as anchors, as things that we can hook onto in order to make a practice more intentional, more effective, more dedicated. And also it can give us some form of, they can give us some measures and tools to monitor our progress over years. I mean, it's difficult to monitor our progress in terms of our practice on a daily basis. Sometimes it seems that we are making, not just within a span of a few weeks or a few months, we're making an incredible progress. But at least for me, it hasn't worked so like that so far. For me, I'm a really slow learner, really slow practitioner. I think that I can now assess my mind and compare it to how it was maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago and see that there is some progress. Not a massive progress, but there are some changes. I think that those changes definitely are attributed to my involvement with the teachings of the Buddha, trying to practice them as much as I can. But also we can also be frank in saying that as we grow old, or older at least, we have more experience in life. We can navigate our life in a way that is more useful for ourselves and others. We learn from mistakes. And this is also part of our mental training, hopefully. Anyway, so we call this set of instructions on the 5 powers a set of instructions that is a Mahayana mind training. But then, and often when we look at the explanation that is given of the 5 powers as an integrated practice for the remaining of our life, we mainly get an explanation of how we set our mind up, how we generate this strong motivation to do better in terms of Mahayana practice. So, waking up in the morning, for example, and thinking that today I will do my best in order to be helpful to others. I will do my best in order to practice Bodhichitta. I will attain the state of enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. I will try my best to at least avoid harming others. So it's a very kind of, the whole set of teachings is pitched pretty much from the point of view of the Mahayana, the mind of enlightenment, the associated branches of the mind of enlightenment, or the practices of bodhisattvas. But when I think about the 5 powers in general, I think that it's a really useful tool to integrate all the states of the path of enlightenment, right from the states of the path of those of the small scope, through to the medium scope, and then to the great scope, as an integrated Buddhist practice for the duration of our life. So not just kind of thinking about it as a few isolated, very strong Mahayana motivations, which are excellent, but we can integrate everything, all of our practice, into this system of the 5 powers. And so we have, when we use the 5 powers, actually before I continue, I will let's look at the list of 5 powers so that we have at least something to hook onto. All right, so the 5 powers: the power of intention, the power of habituation, the power of the white seed, the power of purification, which is also called the power of repudiation, and the power of aspiration. So we use these 5, and we also create a certain flow, certain system. There's a certain time of the day that we use the 5 powers. And so first off, we have the first power that is mentioned. Actually, before that, in different texts, the 5 powers are listed in a different order. Sometimes you have the power of intention that is coming first. Sometimes you have the power of the white seed that is coming first. Sometimes you have the power of habituation that will be presented first. So there might be a different sequence of explanation, but in terms of the practice, I think that all the texts I looked at explain the practice in a similar fashion. And so we have first off the power of intention. So let's divide our day to what we do in the morning, what we do throughout the day, and then what we do in the evening before going to bed, before going to sleep. And so most of the time, as you wake up in the morning, you begin with the power of intention, setting a motivation for the day. Now, for me, this kind of part of as soon as I wake up in the morning is a bit nebulous, in that often it takes my mind to gear up when I wake up in the morning. So, it's not that kind of I drop up of bed and immediately kind of sit down in a full meditation posture and correct my motivation. It takes me maybe half an hour until I kind of from waking up, having a quick shower, making a cup of coffee. It takes me some time until I start my practice. But if it works for you, I think that if you get into the habit, into the neck of generating at least a certain positive motivation as soon as you open your eyes in the morning or rise up from bed, why not? But what I normally do, and I think that this is probably kind of, I feel like, a privileged white monk. I have the ability to organize my day around my practice or the schedule here at Chenrezig Institute. So I'm pretty lucky in that sense. Not people that have, I think, normal life, ordinary life, might find it more challenging to dedicate a big portion of the morning, or an hour or two or half an hour to sitting in meditation. But if you can do that, that's, of course, the more you can do it, the better the result is, I think. And so at least for me, I find that if I start my meditation practice in the morning, before I switch on my phone, before I check the news, before I start texting friends, before I check what's going on, if I start my morning, first of all, with meditation in which I set my intention for the day, it has this positive effect over the day. I read in one text a while ago about setting our intention, so that if you set a really strong intention to conduct your mind in a certain way throughout the day, to keep a positive frame of mind throughout the day, you do it very strongly and you really mean it, not just say the words, right? So in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we have many things to recite, lots of recitation. No, we add this verse and the other verse. And often we end up with so many different recitations that we hardly think of the things that we recite. But then if we at least give ourselves the time to think of the very basic, the very basic is Refuge and Bodhichitta. And normally in my own meditation practice in the morning, I spend something like 20 minutes or 30 minutes just meditating on all the stages leading up to going for Refuge and developing Bodhichitta before I even say the verse for Refuge and Bodhichitta. And so I take the time to kind of really let it influence my mind. And I find that often having set that intention in the morning, it has a good effect for the remaining of the day. So I started saying that one of the texts that I read a while ago said that it is like, for example, and this is like a grim example. So it is like, for example, a parent or a mother that lost her beloved child, being kind of recently lost her beloved child, being taken out to see a show. So although what she sees in the show is pretty exciting, pretty entertaining, still one part of the mind cannot let go of grief and pain. I don't know, this example is a little bit weird. I think that we need to flip it to the positive side rather than speaking about letting our mind being affected by kind of this grief or really sad eventuality. I think that the point is that if we generate a really strong motivation during the morning and really mean it during the days, even if we're going to experience things which are challenging, things that are even in happy occasions, even in sad occasions, just by the virtue of setting a strong intention in the morning, we'll have a better capacity to remind ourselves of the initial intention that we had in the morning and work out a better response to a given situation. So it is a crucial point. It is a crucial part of spiritual practice to at least make sure that we do set a positive intention in the morning. That's the first power, the power of intention. And we will start speaking about ways of correcting our motivation in the morning. So then we have the two next powers, the power of habituation and the power of the white seed. In fact, I think that the power of intention, the power of habituation, and the power of the white seed are very much connected with each other. It's really hard to say which one comes first. In that the power of the white seed is related to the karmic seeds that we have. Not only related to the karmic seeds that we have, we want to deliberately infuse our mind with imprints, with positive imprints. If we have imprints for positive activities, we'll find it easier to do them in the future. We'll encounter a certain situation, and by the force of the imprints that we have infused on a mind stream before, we'd be able to immediately draw upon that pool of positive responses or positive tools that we have for dealing with everyday situations, and to be able to mitigate something that is difficult to make it easy. So imprints, positive imprints, are crucial. So this power is called the power of the white seed. By the way, in the Tibetan culture, Tibetan Buddhist culture, we speak sometimes about positive action, negative action, not sometimes, often, a lot of time, positive actions, negative actions, and they're called white actions and black actions. Sometimes I feel a little bit uncomfortable in calling them white and black because our culture is so infused with, I think that kind of with racial disparity, racism, and so forth. And so I find it sometimes really uncomfortable to use those terms white actions or black actions. Anyway, here, this power is called the power of white seed, giving white kind of this positive connotation. So rather than thinking about it just as white, we can think about it as the power of creating positive seeds. I'm wondering, am I the only one who is kind of a little bit sensitive about this issue, or does it create also some discomfort with you? Yeah, particularly for me, I think that, often, so we have kind of a geshe sitting. I'm now sitting behind me. It's the seat of the geshe here at the center, by the way. So I sit next to the geshe in classes, and I have to translate what the geshe says. I think that for Tibetans, they don't have this racial overtone that we have in our culture. So when the geshe says white action and black actions, I always feel a bit uncomfortable about what to do with this situation. So I stick with positive actions, negative actions. So we have the power of positive seeds, the power of white seeds. And so we want to habituate our mind. So Anna is saying, not at all, but consider other views. Yeah. And so then we have the power of habituation, in which we deliberately want to habituate ourselves to behave in a positive way. So it's not only to habituate our mind with positive states, but also to habituate our physical behavior, to habituate the way that we speak, to habituate ourselves with the way that we speak in a particular way. The most important thing, of course, is to create positive mental habits. If we have imprints, good imprints, we'll find it easier to become habituated with something. If we become habituated with it, we plant more positive imprints. So they're very much linked to each other. If also we develop those habits, the habit of, first of all, starting our morning with correcting our motivation, we'll become accustomed to it. It will no longer be a chore or something that we need to force ourselves to do. It would be an integrated part of our day. Starting a day with setting a positive intention. We create those habits, and we also place imprints, those seeds in the mind stream that will make it better and better, make it possible for us to do it better and better, easier and easier in the future. So they're very much linked with each other. So then we start the morning with correcting our intention. Then during the day, we deliberately try to find points in the day where we enforce our habits. We start sometimes with a contrived behavior. This is why sometimes it says in the text on mind training that train in saying things. Begin with saying the words. I can't remember the exact line in the 7-point mind training, but it says, when you train in something, say it out loud. That's me paraphrasing what the 7-point mind training says. If we say out loud, if we state our intention out loud, at the beginning, we might not mean them that much. There would not be much intention in them. But over time, as we do it again and again and again, and hopefully we develop our personal practice and we continue to study, there are more things that we can put into our intention. And at some point, it's no longer just words, but they have a certain meaning to us. And that meaning is springing from the bottom of our heart. And this is kind of, I mentioned that it takes me, for example, half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour every day to go for Refuge and to generate Bodhichitta. I mean, it's still pretty short, I think, in terms of when we think of what's involved with generating Bodhichitta. Come on, like 20 minutes, half an hour is not enough for generating Bodhichitta. But it's still, I think that maybe 20 years ago, I was just studying kind of a really lame meditation with saying the verse of Refuge and Bodhichitta without knowing exactly or in great details what it means. Over the years, as I study more, as I thought about it more, as I practice it more, I have more things to work with. And so the words that I'm saying every day provide this hook, something that I can latch onto in order to make my practice really systemized and also have an order, have a certain flow and continuity. And so the power of habituation, we want to habituate ourselves with sometimes just phrases, sentences, certain things that we do, so that over time we become habituated more and more with positive behavior. And thereby we plant more positive imprints upon a mind stream. So we do that during the day. Then at the end of the day, we use the remaining two powers, the power of repudiation, the power of regret, the power of purification, many different names, the power of remorse. That's one of them, in which we look at different things. We kind of evaluate what we have done today. Do we have a good day? Do we have a bad day? It's hard to really judge it like that. I mean, we do so many things every day. It's hard to account for all of them, but we do positive things and we do negative things. So we try to have a certain assessment of the day. Did we do more positive things than negative things? Was it a good day in that sense? Was it a bad day? Did we do things that we deeply regret? Have we said things that we deeply regret? Have we harmed or hurt someone that is close to our heart? Were we able to keep with the commitments that we have to our teachers, to the Dharma, to the 3 jewels, to our own personal practice, to ourselves, to the vows that we have, and so forth? So we try to have a certain assessment of how well did we do today. And then we use the practice of purification in order to lay down negative actions that we have done before, and to also set a positive intention for tomorrow. And the positive intention is the 5th power, the power of aspiration. So for me, at least, I see that every day I do positive things and I do negative things. Now, I do not do things in a maniacal way. It's not that I go out and kind of incessantly kill others or harm others and so forth. But it's still, there are points during the day where I think that, well, was a little bit pointless. I should not have said that. I should not have done that. I could have done it better, and yada, yada, yada. So there are always things that we can do better. So at the end of the day, we use the last 2 powers, the power of purification, the power of aspiration, in order to, again, to make it better for tomorrow. So this is the general framework of the 5 powers and when we use them. So intention in the morning, and with intention, with our intention throughout the day, we use the power of the white seed, or the power of positive seeds, the power of habituation. And they also influence what we do at the end of the day. If we accustom ourselves to practices of purification and dedicating all of the virtue that we have accrued throughout the day, and also making aspirations, we'll also, we'll have better habits. We also create more imprints. They will also be accessible to us in the following days, following years, and following lives. I'm wondering if you have any questions before we continue.
Venerable, do you want people to unmute and just speak out? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Please.
Go for it, guys.
All right.
Hello, Venerable.
Hey, Anna.
Hi. Just a quick question. It might be a bit too particular, but I have some kinds of blockage sometimes with my evening practice with purification. I don't know why it's. Well, obviously it's getting later on in the day. I consider tiredness and all of that, so I try and do it around 8 o'clock, being in bed about 9:30, 10.
Wow.
But because I'm a naturally an early riser, doing stuff when I rise as soon as I wake up is fantastic. But the day builds on, my mind starts thinking then, which is never quite a good thing, all the time. So yeah, if there's any little tips for evening practices, little extra motivations, because it probably is to do with a bit of self-worth and is it working and. Yeah.
I think that at least for me, kind of when I think of the part that I bring into my meditation practice, I try to not be too boastful about my practice. I mean, on a personal level, kind of rather than saying high words, and making it sound like fantastic and big, try to look honestly at what I'm capable of doing at the moment and keep it simple and small. In that, of course, kind of, what I mean to say is that, of course, we said that I want to be of maximum benefit to all sentient beings without exception. But at least in my own personal practice, I try to make it a priority to do it at least with the people around me. And so I honestly recognize or I try to be honest with recognizing my ability to be positive with the people around me, and also to be positive, to also acknowledge, at least in an honest way, ways in which I wasn't doing really well with the people around me, or with my commitments to being a monk, or to the Buddha, the Dharma and Sangha, to the vows that I have, and so forth. So I try to do that, and also I try to keep it simple. And I think that I'm also like you, kind of my mind when I get to the evening time, sometimes it's just too busy. If I do a meditation session in the morning, I can easily find some stability. If I try to do it in the evening, it's like really hard going. My mind is kind of quite often really either it is tired or it is still very chattery. So it's more difficult to find stability. But so what I do in the evening is first of all, I try to keep it shorter. If I try to force myself and then feel bad about not doing it well, it is likely that I'm creating those habits where I'll be disinclined to want to do it in the future again. If it's always hard going, it's not pleasant. So if it's always hard going and not pleasant, then it's good to keep it shorter. Keep it shorter and keep it simple. And then at least I think at the end, even when it's hard going and even if it's not really effective, I try to think, at least I tried. You know, the intention was still there. And this is, I think, you know, although we speak of the power of intention in the morning, still also when we finish our practice, when we finish the day, the intention to do well at least was there. So we build up on that, we capitalize on that. So I think that often in this tradition, we have a lot of sadhanas. So for example, sadhanas of purification, saying 35 Buddhas, doing Vajrasattva practice, so doing this practice and the other. Some of those practices are really long. At the end of the day, it's how to do at least for me, it's how to do something that is really extensive. For, I think, advanced practitioners, it's easier. For me, it's still difficult. So I try to keep it simple. I try to look at those practices and strip them down to really what are the most important and vital points in those practices. Like, for example, in the practice of purification, and we'll speak about it, I think, if not next week, in the week after that. So practice of purification, the most important thing is to use the 5 powers. The most important thing is to recognize negative actions as being negative, not to beat ourselves up for that, but to recognize that, well, we've done something that is not positive. It's not the way that I want to behave. It's not the way that I should behave as Buddhist. Therefore, I recognize that. I make a decision to do better tomorrow. Still, in taking into consideration that my mind is controlled by afflictive states of mind. My mind is controlled by anger, attachment, and ignorance. So I'm not going to be able to do it perfectly. No way. But I'm trying. I'm trying my best to do it. And so tomorrow I will try to do better. By the way, also, it is said that when we use this power of restraint, part of turning away, turning our back to negative things that we've done, turning our back to faults, we then develop the power of restraint when we think that I shall not do it again in the future. Well, obviously, we are going to do it again in the future. I mean, sometimes white lies are coming out of my mouth because I'm used to it. You know, it's not that I have this deliberate intention to do it. It just kind of slips out. It happens because my mind is controlled by common afflictive states of mind. And so rather than thinking that I'm not going to do it ever again for the rest of my life until I attain the state of enlightenment, it's good to think about it like that. But obviously, we're not going to be able to do it. So we can think, I'm not going to do it tomorrow. As much as I can, I will try to avoid such negative behavior for the next 10 days. And build up on that, kind of make those short-term commitments, being able to do that. So kind of all of these points are points that I use in order kind of to strip down those big words that we have in a practice is something that works for me on a practical level. So recognizing faults as being faults, coming up with ways which are things or targets or intentions, missions which are most suited to my ability, with the power of restraint, and then with the power of thorough application of the antidote during a particular practice. Often in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we have list of things that we can do. Well, you can do prostrations, you can do recitations of mantras, you can do offerings, you can do this, you can do circumambulations. But actually, the actual antidote will be to develop positive states of mind. So again, as at the end of the day, we can end the day with a positive state of mind. If we feel that our mind during the day was affected by a sense of annoyance, being short-tempered with others, then thinking before we go to sleep, I have to do better. I have to be more patient. Try to develop that sense of consideration, of caring for others. So we don't have to necessarily sit in a really strict meditation posture to do that. Sometimes we can also just think about it as we make preparations for going to sleep. We can try to, as we prepare ourselves for going to sleep, as we kind of wash the dishes, brush our teeth or whatever, we can think of being caring for others tomorrow. That's that's a part of thorough application of the antidote. I don't know if I'm just rambling or whether what I say is getting to the point.
Yeah, thank you, Venerable. I think it really helps with understanding that I actually am doing something, even though I'm not sitting down to do the formal, full practices. Yeah, really reassuring, because the self-doubt then comes in, and then, it can all easily just be forgotten about completely. But to know I'm still doing something is great. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that for me, I think that all of us encounter the Buddhist tradition, and we're outsiders in some sense to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. I mean, I'm saying that even as a Tibetan Buddhist monk. I never know how to do the right thing, the perfect thing. I wasn't born Tibetan, although I lived in India for a few years. I lived among Tibetans. I speak Tibetan. I have a lot of Tibetan friends. Still kind of, I don't know all the ins and outs. And so we have an expectation from ourselves that we'll do things correctly like they do, like Tibetans do, like Tibetan monks do, like Tibetan masters do. We try our best, but I cannot live up to that expectation, because this is not who I am in that sense. I'm not Tibetan. I have my own conditioning. So at least I try to be genuine with my approach to the Dharma. And this is, I think, the most important thing, to be genuine. So we start with saying the words, as I said, kind of we're saying things out loud. We have things that we hook onto, but then over time we try to put more content into them, and the content needs to be heartfelt. So we cannot force being heartfelt to it. We can only get used to it over time. And so we often, I think that it's easy, most of the centers that I'm familiar with are FBNT centers. Although I have teachers also from other traditions, still I've been living for 17 years in an FPMT center and have many friends, maybe Dharma friends coming from this tradition. So there's a certain culture that we develop in this system. And part of it is taking on a lot of practices, a lot of sadhanas, doing different recitations, more recitations, adding more recitation, more verses and so forth. And sometimes it becomes like reciting a lot and not having time to really think about it and develop that heartfelt intention towards it. And so I'm a little bit lazy, I have to say. And so I prefer to take less commitments, have less recitations, but to spend more time in thinking about my practices. And so we're sometimes affected by people around us, thinking that, well, so many people have received practices from their teacher. They receive advice from their teacher. Why am I not receiving advice from my teacher? Maybe I should get more empowerments from my teacher so that I have this personal practice that will make me be like those other friends from my center that have certain things to recite. So we feel this group pressure, peer pressure from a Dharma friends. And I think that kind of over time, at least for me, I managed to kind of strip my mind down from this peer pressure that we sometimes have with our Dharma friends. We don't need to compete with them. We don't need to kind of necessarily to feel that we need more recitations. If you can do it, of course, perfect. If you can also mean what you say, perfect. For me, being lazy and also kind of, I have different responsibilities. Also, I have different commitments that I receive from different empowerments or different instructions that I got from teachers. I have enough to work with. I don't want to kind of turn it into just like a long list of things that I recite. And so there are certain things, certain recitation commitments that I got, and I keep them simple. I think I might say them really quickly, but still in my mind, I'm holding on to the most important principle in those recitations. trying to habituate the mind with what I should mean when I say those words. So that's my kind of, I think that this is my approach to it. Keep it simple. Try to isolate the most important, the core principles in each one of those practices, and at least work on those aspects. Work on the main trunk of the text, and the branches will become aligned later on down the track. And we cannot do things perfectly, so we also need to forgive ourselves. All right. And so let's start with the power of intention. So often, as I said in text, it says, as soon as you wake up in the morning, feels like as soon as you open your eyes. To me, as I said, it's hard to get my mind into gear as soon as I open my eyes up in the morning. But not long after that, I start my morning meditation practice. So let's go to the next point. So as I said, arranging a day with the practice of the 5 powers, morning, the power of intention, we'll start with that. So start the day with the power of intention. And here I think that there are 2 approaches. This is how I thought about it in the last couple of days. So there are, for the dedicated, hardworking, invested, seasoned practitioners, someone also that has the capacity or the ability, the external conditions that will allow themselves to spend more time in meditating in the morning. Then the second approach is for someone that is more busy, more lazy, or late riser. I think that probably, although I would like to be the first type of person, dedicated, hardworking, invested, seasoned practitioner, I'm probably more in the second group of busy, lazy, or late riser. I tried for some time to wake up really early in the morning to start my meditation practice in the morning. They always say that the mind is way more clear in the morning. I'm still trying to do it, but I can't wake up early in the morning. It just does not work for me. It doesn't matter what time I go to sleep at night, even if I go to sleep at 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, waking up at 5 a.m. is just a struggle. Maybe it's related to the lack of power of habituation and a lack of power of positive seeds. But for me, I wake up in the morning, let's say 6:30, 7, not that early, I think that's reasonable. And then I have the luxury of arranging my day around a certain meditation practice. A few years ago, I started attending teachings by Taisitu Rinpoche, my ordination master. He is teaching a course of 6 or 7 years Mahamudra instructions, and part of the course commitment is to meditate for 2 hours every day. And so we began these teachings with thinking of the benefits of this meditation or this meditation practice. At some point, I thought to myself that really, if I'm not going to be serious about at least my meditation, if I try to cut corners too much, I still cut corners, but if I kind of turn that to be the main part of the meditation, cutting corners, I'm not going to reap the benefit of this meditation. I'm not going to finish this precious course of meditation for 7 years in knowing that I've done my best and got the most out of it. And so I motivate myself to try at least to wake up at a certain point in the morning that will allow me to at least spend a bigger portion of meditation in order to make the most out of it, given that later on during the day, it's way harder. My mind is not as pliant, not as agile, not as stable, not as concentrated as the mind that I have in the morning. And so, but also I acknowledge that many of my Dharma friends have busy lives. People have families, people have jobs, people have commitments, people have other things, other people that are responsible to. Not always it is possible for people to dedicate an hour or 2 hours every morning to meditation. But still, I think that if the intention is there, if we prioritize our spiritual practice, there are ways in which we can naturally arrange a day in order to fit it better around our spiritual practice. If we force it, it's going to be hard going. If we want to do it, if the wish to do it will be coming from the depth of our heart, we'll be more capable of rearranging our priorities. And again, I think that over the years, naturally, as I went deeper into my study, into thinking about what I studied, into trying to integrate the Dharma in my daily life, daily, the changing of priorities, naturally, the changing of my priorities occur. Now, I don't have to force it anymore. It's kind of more in a natural, coming up in a natural way. Still have a long way to go. I think when I think of, for example, my priorities and the priorities of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, is on as the Dalai Lama. I mean, maybe I'm a high achiever, but I want to be like that, So I still have a long way to go, very long way to go to have my priorities set like their priorities, but it's work in progress over the years. And so let's look at those two thoughts that I try to string together. So for the dedicated, hardworking, invested, and seasoned practitioner, start with the Lamrim meditation and base your practice on Refuge and Bodhichitta. So this is what I'm trying to do in my, basically in all the practices that I do, to focus, to make them focused on Refuge and Bodhichitta, and to go into great details with Refuge and Bodhichitta. We often start every practice that we undertake with a recitation of Refuge and Bodhichitta, and we do it so briefly. It takes 10 seconds maybe or maybe a minute or half a minute to say the verse for Refuge and Bodhichitta. But over the years, I started to spend more time in thinking of Refuge and Bodhichitta, and then work all the other bits of all the other practices that I do in order to fit into Refuge and Bodhichitta. So this is one approach. The second approach is either when your mind is not, I guess, set up to do it yet, or when you have busy, we might have busy periods in our life where, for 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, we're just busy. We don't have the capacity, the ability to meditate every morning for 1 hour, 2 hours, and so forth. And so at least we can do it briefly. At least work up again, what is the most important thing that we want to do today in terms of our intention. So setting our intention, even briefly with Refuge and Bodhichitta, not meditating on it for a long time, but just setting our intention briefly with Refuge and Bodhichitta, and then to strongly focus on remembering and practicing the Bodhisattva attitude during the day. After all, as I said before, this practice of the 5 powers is called Mahayana mind training. So it has a very, it is pitched at a certain angle. The angle is to be of maximum benefit to other sentient beings, to keep in mind the attainment of the state of Buddhahood for the sake of others, to try to practice as much as we can the Bodhisattva conduct. So if we can only do it succinctly, if we are busy, if we are lazy, if we woke up too late today, then at least try to set our intention for the day with Refuge and Bodhichitta and this Mahayana spirit. That's beginning our day with a power of intention. But still, what I wanted to speak of today, and also we will continue to speak about it next, is how then we start a day with Refuge and Bodhichitta and make that an intention for the remaining of the day. Because I think that often when we start a certain practice, a meditation session, a certain sadhana that we recite, as I said, we begin with Refuge and Bodhichitta, and it seems like it is one short thing that we do at the very beginning of the practice before we get to the main actual part of the practice. Whereas for me, I think that the actual part of the practice is Refuge and Bodhichitta, and all the things that are found in the practice should slide into refuge in bodhicitta, naturally. And so when I was thinking of the five powers and how I do put them into practice every day, then I thought that, well, although the power of intention is often explained, actually we can read that briefly through looking at mind training like the rays of the sun. Where is it? Maybe I close it, just a second. All right, I'm sharing it with you. All right, so it says, with the power of intention, it says, we must set a strong determination, thinking, I shall not let the primary, secondary disturbing emotions, which arise from the misconception of self, dominate my activities of body, speech, even for a moment. From now until I attain enlightenment, or at any time in this life until I die, this year, this month, and today in particular. Similarly, make a strong resolve, thinking I will become familiar with and never be separated from the awakening mind, from bodhicitta, until I have attained the highest enlightenment, and so forth. And today in particular, I shall not be parted from it. The King of Meditative Stabilization Sutra says, the more a human being analyzes something because the force of his thought or her thought is focused on it, the mind dwells on it more strongly. So that's the power of intention. So here I think that the spirit of this practice that you find in mind training, like the rays of the sun, focuses on, Mahayanas, first of all, the Mahayana spirit, make a strong resolve, I will become familiar with and never be parted from bodhicitta until I die, but also just to become aware of our mind during the day, of our disturbing emotions, and to gain some control over the mind during the day, not only our mind, but also our verbal and physical activities. And so we begin a day with refuge, or at least I begin my day with refuge in bodhicitta. But it's not just beginning a practice with refuge in bodhicitta. I try to at least remind myself of the steps of the path in stages. So I assume that many of you are familiar with the structure of the Lamrim, or some structure of the Lamrim, the steps of the path to enlightenment. Basically, this tradition is aiming at changing our priorities, shifting our priorities first off from focusing only on this life, or mainly on this life, and start to think of what will occur to us in future life. Then making a greater shift in terms of our priority. Even if I'm born in a good state of rebirth in my next life, how am I going to get myself out of samsara, given that samsara is a troublesome state? At any state within samsara, there's still a lot of problems. Even if it's an excellent samsaric state, it's not good enough. It's not as satisfactory. So we shift our priorities then, or we make them greater to attain the state of liberation, and then even greater to become Buddha for the sake of everyone. And so in order to do that, we first of all, within the presentation of the Lamrim, we recognize that we have attained a precious human rebirth with freedoms and richnesses. So spend some time in the morning and thinking about it. Sit on my meditation cushion in the morning. So it can be brief, could be also long. So we think of, first of all, having all the external conditions and internal conditions that make it possible for us to develop our mind, to make it the best as we can. So we have external conditions. First of all, we can say that in terms of our ability to study and practice the Dharma. I don't know how it is for you guys in the US or anywhere else, but it seems that at least here in Australia, or at least in my initial Buddhist involvement in Israel, it's pretty much a middle class and up thing. We have the facilities, conditions that make it possible for us to spend some time in looking at our mind. Now, if our life would have been a day-to-day struggle for food, for shelter, for security, and so forth, would have been hard going, would have been way harder for us. And so we have these external conditions that make it possible for us. But also on top of that, we have external conditioning in terms of our spiritual teachers. This is, you can say, the main external condition. Spiritual teachers to teach us. And then we have the internal conditions, freedoms and richnesses. So there's kind of the 8 freedoms, the 10 richnesses or opportunities. They're also called the 10 endowments. We don't have now to go over the list of 8 and 10, but the summation of them is that we have everything that it takes to make a life meaningful. And it is of great advantage. That's the second point of thinking of a precious human rebirth. It is of great advantage. It has a great purpose. And the purpose is not what we can get in this life, but attaining a good state of rebirth in the next life, attaining the state of liberation, attaining the state of enlightenment. It is possible on the basis of having attained a precious human rebirth. And then, or having freedoms and richnesses. So we think of recognizing that we have the external and internal conditions, freedoms and richnesses that are of great meaning, that is so difficult to find freedoms and richnesses. And that there are different ways of explaining that or demonstrating that. We can look at that from the point of view of the causes that produce freedoms and richnesses, from the point of view of just the essence of the natures of freedoms and richnesses, in terms of analogies, in terms of numbers, just in terms of, if we think about it in terms of the causes that are required to produce a good state of rebirth, a human rebirth. I'm not speaking of freedoms and richnesses, but just to be born as a human being, it is said that we need to have practiced perfect, pure ethical discipline. To practice pure ethical discipline does not mean to say that we need to do everything perfect. Had that been the case, none of us would have been able to be born as a human being. But it means at least to abstain from the 10 non-virtues, to practice ethical discipline that abstain from the 10 non-virtues. But even that is so hard, I think, that when we start to think of our day-to-day behavior. So abstaining from getting pure ethical discipline and abstaining from the 10 non-virtues does not necessarily mean that we don't do any of them, even in the slightest, because had that been the case, none of us would have been able to do it. It means that we try our best. We know what we need to do. We know what we ought not to do. We try our best to do it. And when we find that we were not capable of keeping up with our ethical discipline, that we have maybe told a small lie, that we have created certain damage, that we have spoken negatively about another person. I mean, what about the mental non-virtues? Covetousness, malice, or ill will. We have that happening so many times during the day, unfortunately. So it's impossible for us to abstain from that completely at the moment. But we at least recognize that. We recognize them for being what they are. And when we lay them down, when we at least try to purify them, we have the intention to do it. We recognize them as faults. And we do not play them down. We do not downplay them. We don't think that it's not a big deal. It's just a small non-virtuous action. We don't think about it like that. We think that was not a good thing to do. That was a negative thing to do. I don't want to do it again in the future. I will try my best not to do it in the future. Doing it like that is working towards pure ethical discipline, and that is creating the foundation for a good state of rebirth, a human rebirth in the next lifetime. And so, at least for me, it's hard. I don't know about what you guys, but at least for me, to guard this pure ethical discipline is hard, but we're trying, hey. And so, pure ethical discipline is the basic cause for attaining a good state of rebirth in the next lifetime. Then we need to supplement that with the practice of the 6 perfections. Now, the practice of the 6 perfections, it just means that we need to then supplement our ethical discipline with being generous, with being patient, with developing wisdom, with developing joy and enthusiasm in a spiritual practice. And at the end of our life, we also need to then, that's the third cause, we need to connect it up with making positive or aspirational prayers. Perfect, stainless aspirational prayers. I mean, prayers, it doesn't mean to say that we need to say something. It means that we need to try as much as we can to have a positive state of mind before we die. It is said that there is a brief moment before we die in which, if a state of mind is positive, it will direct us to a good state of rebirth in the next lifetime. If a state of mind is negative, fearful, angry, full of remorse, and so forth, if a state of mind is so narrow and internalized, it will likely lead us to a miserable state of rebirth in the next lifetime. And so, thinking of these three sets of causes for a good state of rebirth, we can appreciate, first of all, the hard work that we have done in our past lifetime. We have practiced pure ethical discipline in past lifetimes, so we can do it in this lifetime. We have imprints for that. We don't need to beat ourselves up. We have done it before. We can do it again. We also have practiced generosity. We have practiced patience. We have practiced wisdom and so forth, because we have met the Dharma in this life. We have resources for our disposal in our day-to-day life, but also we have resources that will allow us to practice the Dharma. We have patience, we have wisdom, we have concentration. All of them help us in our practice of the Dharma and also in other areas of our life. So we have done it before, and we can do it again, but it's not easy. So that's the second thing that we think, the third thing that we think of. So recognizing freedoms and richnesses, that they are of great advantage, how difficult it is to find them, and then at the end, how easy it is to lose freedoms and richnesses. And here we start to think of death and impermanence. Death is certain. And every moment that passes, every day that passes, we're getting closer and closer to the moment of death. And the time of death is unknown. It is uncertain. It can happen in 20 years from now, in 10 years from now, but it can also happen today. We have no certainty. And everything, it seems, around us can act as a condition that can easily bring about our death. Now, I live here at Chenrezig Institute. And it seems that in Australia and Queensland, and there's so many poisonous things around us. I mean, when I came here to Chenrezig Institute in the first, I think, year or two, I was freaked out all the time. In the summertime, we see snakes every day. Many of them actually are not poisonous snakes, but it was enough for me just to see a snake to go into a heart arrest. So, it's not like that anymore. Now we have mutual respect for each other. And there are beautiful snakes here. Some of them are pythons, some of them are green tree snakes, non-poisonous, but we also have some poisonous snakes. We also have scorpions and ticks and centipedes and all other shenanigans. So many conditions, in short, can exacerbate our death, quickly bring our death, and some of them are quite trivial. We never know. And at the time of death, nothing will be of help apart from the Dharma. Nothing will be of help apart from the Dharma means that whatever positive conditions, positive imprints, positive habituations we've collected in this life and previous lifetime, that will be the thing that will take with us to our next lifetime. That will be what will be of use being on the verge of death. Our friends will not help, our possessions will not help. Of course, they will help in a certain, they can support us. But in terms of generating a positive state of mind, being on the verge of death, if we have habituated the mind with doing that, we'll be able to do it. Without having habituated the mind to do that, it will be hard going. It's not that it's impossible. It's still possible in some unlikely situation, but wouldn't it be way better, way easier if we were to habituate the mind with doing that? And so we think of death and impermanence, and then we start thinking of what will occur to us in future lifetime. Determining that definitely we don't want to end up in a miserable state of rebirth, lots of suffering, and also no possibility of developing our mind, meeting the Dharma, meeting spiritual teachers. There will be a lot of confusion, a lot of will act based upon core states of mind. I don't want to. No, I don't want that situation. What I want is to be born again as a human being. A little bit affluency would not be, would be quite nice to have enough resources, but to meet the Dharma, to meet the teachers, to be able to continue the work that I've been doing in this life. This is what I want. And so to do so, we begin with going for refuge. Now, I see that our time is up for today, and I wanted to kind of, I wanted to speak a lot about refuge in terms of setting our intention for the day and see how it is basically hooked into going for refuge, not just saying the words, but turning a mind to be a mind of refuge. So since the time is up for today, we'll leave it for our next session next week. So next week, we'll start with looking at how we turn refuge into the intention for the day, and then also Bodhichitta for the intention of the day. And so I'm wondering if you have any questions or comments before we bid each other goodbye, not forever, but just for a week.
Venerable, I think there's no immediate class after this, so there's not a panic. And the other thing I'd like to say is that I've dug out the text that you had on your slide. Would you like to check it first, or can I make the PDF available? It looks correct. It's a free resource, and everybody, it's the one on. Can I do that? I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah. Put it here in the chat, and I'll check it out. And yeah. I think that also, keep in mind that there are also, there could be different explanations of the 5 powers. So it's not that there is like one right and all the other wrong. Because often I use different sources, and I kind of just try to integrate instructions in all of them. Yeah, so please provide the link, and we can see if it's working for everyone.
I'll just go quiet again.
All right. By the way, how do you pronounce your name? Is it Paula or?
Paola, Italian.
Paula. All right, because I thought this is what it is. There are also Paulos in Australia, but when I started calling Paulas Paula, I was corrected as this is not Paula, this is Paula. This is how they say it in Australia, Paula. All right, so let's look at what you posted. Oh, it's pretty long. All right, I'll check it for kind of, I read it. It seems that it's a useful source. All right, so I'll read it kind of in the next few days, and I guess that it's useful. I think that's sometimes the more things we can use, the better. Not all of them we can practice or integrate for the time being, but we kind of, over time, we have more to work with and assimilate. All right. So thank you very much for coming and not leaving me all by myself alone in the dark. And I will see you next week. And if you cannot join in, as Paula said, the recordings would be on the YouTube channel of the center. And so let's finish up with dedicating all the virtues that we have created together by thinking about it, speaking about it, thinking about it. First off, dedicating the virtue that we have collected together to think that may I be able to practice better, to improve my practice. And to improve my practice means to make my mind better, so that I'm better for myself, and also my attitude is better towards others, so that I'll be able to refrain from harming myself and harming other living beings. And ultimately might be able to use whatever I study, whatever I think of, and all the things that I practice in order to, on the long term, develop bodhicitta, practice the 6 perfections, and become a Buddha for the sake of all living beings. We can also recite some dedication verses that we often recite in teachings. Where are they? Just a second, since I closed the file. Right. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Several of the snowland teachings and transmigrated beings who makes extremely clear the path that is unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And finally, we recite the long life prayer for Kyabje Lama Sopa Rinpoche. You uphold this abjurious moral way, who serves in the manifold bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Majjuna's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the 3 jewels. Several of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Thank you. Good night, everyone in the US, and good day, everyone in Japan and in Australia, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Paula.